South Africa, a nation of unparalleled beauty and opportunity. For decades, our people have toiled diverse landscapes and helped build vibrant cities, which today sustain millions of livelihoods. As a democratic nation, we have navigated immense social and economic challenges. We still face stark rates of unemployment, homelessness, and poverty. And through it all, we are molded into resilient people who contribute to a dynamic economy and business environment.
At PwC, we understand that the key to unlocking South Africa's potential lies in collaboration. Just as our Government of National Unity has joined forces to drive transformative change, so should we as business and civil society. By bringing our humanity to the fore and playing our part in driving responsible growth, we will create a sustainable future that is holistic and impactful.
Our latest global CEO survey reveals that nearly 60% of CEOs are optimistic about the future of the global economy. This optimism is crucial as we navigate unprecedented changes and seek to continue on a sustained path of economic growth.
But what does responsible business growth resemble? It's more than just economic success. It's about ensuring that our progress is beneficial for everyone and attainable. It's about upholding policies that support good governance, holding our leaders accountable across all sectors. And in so doing, we will create a stable environment for businesses to thrive and for our people to trust in their institutions.
This is how we forge ahead as a more collaborative, cohesive, and innovative nation. Let us continue to collaborate and inspire one another, and let us commit to using our skills and resources to create a lasting impact to build trust in what matters. For when we grow responsibly, we create a legacy of hope and prosperity that will benefit generations to come.
Good morning, everybody. You do know there wasn't actually a budget speech, right? And it's a weird idea that we're having the 2025 budget speech breakfast without a budget speech. But we all know what was in it because we've all read it. And there are one or two small issues which we need to discuss today. Edward Kieswetter sends his apologies. Apparently he's tied up with other stuff. I'm not sure what it would be, but he was scheduled to join us today, but apparently there's something about fixing a number or something. Anyway, I don't know. We are going to be taking live questions today from you. In the room and, of course, on the live streams in all of the regions that we're servicing today as well. Welcome to everybody in places that couldn't make it to Gauteng because of the rain and other reasons. But the QR codes on the chairs where you were sat are an opportunity for you to scan that QR code, and your questions will come through to me, and I will get through as many of those as possible. I will then hand the device to Kyle to answer the really complicated personal questions that otherwise you'd have to pay him a fee for, but he'll be obliged to send you an email in response if you ask it here. Then, if your mobile devices, please, could be on mute, so that we don't get the pings, pongs, and all of those sorts of things. And there's a Wi-Fi code which is available at the registration desk. A bit late now, so don't be cheap. Use your own data, which will be fine. And then if you spend all 90 minutes in the room, you get your CPD points through the PwC Business School. You need to complete a form because, hey, this is an accounting firm after all, and indicate where the bathrooms are situated. They're that way. Good, excellent. All of that is done. Now, one of my more pleasant tasks today before we set in about the torture of my panelists, who I'll introduce to you in some detail, but I think you know everybody. I'd like to invite the CEO of PwC Southern Africa, Shirley Machaba, to give us a brief insight into the budget that never was. Morning, Shirley.
Thank you very much, Bruce. for such a brief introduction. I like it. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our 2025 breakfast panel session. It's really good to see all of you, both in person and virtually. So you will know that the 2025 budget has been postponed to March. However, today's discussion remains incredibly relevant, coming at a time when South Africa continues its reform efforts. These efforts are crucial as we address pressing challenges such as energy security, infrastructure development, including the water crisis and high unemployment. Today, we are honored to have an esteemed panel with us to unpack the discussions and explore how we can work together towards a responsible growth for a sustainable future. I would like to extend a warm welcome to our esteemed panelists, starting with Busisiwe Mavuso, the CEO of BLSA, South Africa, Lulu Krieger, PwC South Africa partner, chief economist and sustainability leader. Juanita Hunter, award-winning political journalist and best-selling author. Kyle Mendy, our PwC South Africa partner, tax, technical and policy leader. As we reflect on South Africa's challenges and opportunities, it's essential to consider how businesses across sub-Saharan Africa are navigating the evolving global landscape. The recently launched PwC 28th Annual Global CEO Survey, Sub-Saharan Perspective, highlights key trends, including the rise of AI and the shift towards business model reinvention, a growing optimism among regional CEOs, with 63% expressing confidence in global economic growth, is a reminder of the resilience we must embody. This optimism is reflected in their growing investments in new sectors as technological innovations, such as AI, which are central to future economic growth. In South Africa, these global trends resonate with our own journey. As we confront challenges like energy crisis and infrastructure gaps, innovation and adaptability will play a key role in ensuring that our economy is both sustainable and future-ready. A key aspect, which is a vital mechanism for unlocking the potential of key sectors like energy, logistics, and infrastructure, is a public-private partnerships. These partnerships are not only crucial for economic recovery, but are foundational for building growth that is inclusive, responsible, and sustainable for generations to come. At PwC, we are deeply committed to this vision of responsible growth. Our strategy, based on Ubuntu Betu, you want to call it our humanity, reflects a belief that our societal purpose extends beyond profit generation. We are aligned with the United Nations SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. And through this alignment, we aim to contribute for a future where economic progress is balanced with social and environmental responsibility. We firmly believe that responsible growth for a sustainable future is not just an aspiration. It is a responsibility that we all share. As we dive into today's discussions, our panel will examine the role of fiscal discipline and how all of us, business, government, and civil society, can contribute to creating a more sustainable, equitable future for South Africa. Key areas such as energy reforms, job creation, and infrastructure development will be central to this conversation. I'm excited for the engaging discussion ahead, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the insights from our esteemed panelists. Thank you once again for being with us today. I now hand you over to our capable MC, Bruce Whitfield. Enjoy this very well-organized event.
Shirley, thank you. If all else fails, I have the solution in this box, but I'm keeping it just in case we don't find the solution to the problem in which we find ourselves. Juanita, let me start with you, because Shirley's introduced everybody, so it seems pointless to do it all over again. How did we get into this mess? We don't need a 30-year history of democracy, but just this week, how did it exactly play out? That at 12:30 on Wednesday, we went, you know what? I know everybody's in town. I know we're going to do no, we're not going to do the budget speech. How did it go so wrong so fast?
Go and have lunch at the V&A while you're at it.
Boost Cape Town's economy, yes.
Well, South Africa is governed by a grand coalition, and this is an incredibly important feat for democracy. I am optimistic, and I don't think what happened on Wednesday is a mess.
It's fantastic. It is a mess, but that's the point.
But that's the point.
Yeah.
So we saw this coming as a nation, that the ANC's grip on power would diminish. The question was, what that iteration of what comes next? And the fear, because of the example of Southern Africa and former liberation movements, was that we don't have good examples of conceding of power. We don't have to look far. 6 hours away in Maputo, there's some mess going on there.
That's a mess.
Right?
Yes.
So the fact that we are here and that we are governed by 10 parties, we'll talk about how well we are governed by them. But the fact that we are here and we have a stable government in a world where you see what's happening in Tunisia with the subversion of democracy, in Venezuela, I mean, we can list a whole laundry list of countries. South Africa withstood a very important pressure test.
Yep.
Right? Why? Multiple things. We cool people.
That's the most important. Yep.
We can thank our ancestors, I suppose. But ultimately, it was a really resilient moment for democracy in South Africa to be where we are, that we have a government of national unity, which, let's not call it a GNU, it's a grand coalition, or not grand coalition, it's a multi-party coalition, and it's working. Why is it working? It's working, Bruce.
No, it's sticking together, but is it working? We've got 0.8% growth. We've got a few more jobs created.
But we have a government in place. Let's start there.
A government in place, but that doesn't mean that the government is working.
No, but the metric to test them will come in time when we'll...
It's happening right now.
Right, and now so what is it? Voters rejected all political parties,
Yep.
and everyone was bruised after the election, besides probably Jacob Zuma, whose mission is very clear, to subvert democracy entirely. So let's leave him out of the equation. So now what you have is this interest from all these parties that realize that breaking the country is not working. It's sound bites, but no one wants it anymore. So everyone has to build as a demonstration to the voter that we have your interest at heart. The IFP suffered losses, the EFF suffered losses, the DA reached the ceiling. Everyone is vested in this more than you think, right? So that's a good thing.
Yep.
Now, once you have a coalition, budgets are always going to be the sticking point. Coalitions fall apart because of budgets. We just have to look across to the green robot scenario in Germany.
Of course.
Right? And so, but this particular falling apart or stalemate, I think, is less, so when I say it's not a mess, it's a mess in terms of public perception, etc. But it's not really fundamental falling apart of a government.
What was so interesting, though, was the fact that the finance minister felt the need to keep the fact that he was making the biggest tax announcement in decades, and he felt the need to keep it secret because it would be sensitive to markets if it leaked. And it's... and you're in a coalition, and one of your deputy ministers, because you've got two, because that's important to have wing people, is from the opposition, who know what is going on, but they only decide to throw a hand grenade into the water, a figurative hand grenade, on the morning of the budget.
Yeah.
Why do they not? And this is where, this is where the brinkmanship comes in, and I suppose this is the messy nature of coalitions. They could have put their hands up sooner.
Yeah.
And they chose not to. They chose to go right to the 11th hour. That's wonderful politics, but it just feels unnecessarily messy.
Absolutely, and similar for the Expropriation Act. The mess was process. The mess wasn't really, substance per se. We always knew the DA was going to oppose. But to say this, the ANC toggles between amnesia between like realizing that we lost election essentially.
Yeah, when you write the script for the movie,
Yes.
you can call it, I don't know, They're Just Not That Into You. Or something along those lines. I mean, that's my favorite working title of the moment.
That's a good one. But essentially, they forget that they are not governing alone sometimes, and they have to be constantly reminded, right? And so this was the case with this. Remember, in the days of Trevor Manuel and even Tito Mboweni, there was this thing that says the finance minister and treasury has this control over what ends up being in the budget. Don't touch us on the budget, right?
The adults are in charge.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so what happens is it's that amnesia that you don't have the same dynamic like before. And so you can't flippantly mention it on the 5th of February in a cabinet meeting and think it's not going to spill, right? Although it's a bit illegal to leak from cabinet, but we'll forget about that.
So, yeah.
and then you then have the situation where the DA needs something to assert itself. Remember, this is what the DA is doing. The DA is using its access to power as an audition for the next election.
Yeah.
So what it's trying to do is show that it has, where it governs or where it has power, that it's going to do it differently. Because opposition politics has not worked for them. Saying the ANC is bad has not worked for them. It took them to a ceiling. They need to actually show that they do things better. So there's always going to be that push and pull that exists, right? That's number one. Number two is the noise doesn't mean dysfunction entirely.
No.
I am optimistic that coalitions are noisy, but now what happens when a budget doesn't get delivered? I think that points more to the person in charge in the room. Because the person in charge ought to have negotiated...
Managed it, yes.
Yes, 2 hours before the budget.
There were some technical reasons as to why he wasn't in the room first thing Wednesday morning.
Yeah, so usually...
So what happened there?
Usually on a budget day, the finance minister will then go to cabinet, present, they'll get the green light, they will then go to this, the media briefing in the lockup, and we ask the finance minister a few questions, he then goes to parliament, and then markets react. I don't know, you guys go crazy or not, right? but essentially that's the order of the day. What happened on Wednesday was a bit different. The finance minister speaks to the media first. The cabinet meeting comes after that. The cabinet meeting was delayed because the president couldn't get to Cape Town in time due to the weather. So let's blame this entire mess not on politics, but on the weather.
That's useful, yes.
He ended up having to hop onto a commercial flight.
In economy or business?
Listen. And then Paul Mashatile had to chair the meeting until the president arrived, and the president eventually says, right, there's too much of chaos, let's postpone it. And it's kicking the can down the road is a classic Cyril Ramaphosa leadership style.
And in this case happens to be the right thing to do.
In this case happens to be the right thing to do. But it becomes tricky when you don't have that many options to go back to.
Yeah.
But I mean, the experts
But that's
will
why
talk
we're here.
about.
That's why we're here. Wadisa, thank you for setting it up so very, very nicely. I would ask the same question to you, Lulu. How did we get to this point from an economist's point of view? Because up until 15 years ago, roughly, 2008, budget surpluses, 5 million jobs have been created. There was growth of up to 5.5%. There was a global commodities tailwind. Interest rates were low. There were lots of reasons why things were good. But things were ticking along. The adults were in charge. And then we went into the 15-year, well, no, maybe a 12-year desert until Tito came back and started smacking heads about again. And things felt like there was a bit of optimism. We've had virtually no load shedding for nearly 12 months. That should have brought something of an uplift. Interest rates are starting to come down. There's definitely a better sense of the country now than there was when we were here 12 months ago. Yet the data's not showing it. Why?
Well, I think very simply, Bruce, to turn some of the things that you've mentioned, that's positives, like the reduction in load shedding, the fact that we have the GNU with some tensions and, people being held responsible or even holding themselves responsible, as Juanita has said, they are all auditioning for the next elections. All of those things are good signals. But the thing is, it's 12 years of damage, and it won't be undone in less than a year. If we look at business sentiment, for example, yes, we haven't had load shedding, and you would expect...
We did.
Okay, yeah, I forgot about that. But you would have expected that would have resulted in a turnaround. The reality is that, well, first of all, I think a lot of businesses are under significant pressure. So, to unravel that, to get to a point where we can start to focus on growth, on expansion, moving away from this significant focus on cost cutting. And it's not only here. I mean, we've come from a difficult global environment as well. That will take time. And to turn around the business sentiment will take time. However, I have to say that it's been a minute since we've last seen that fiscal policy and the budget really achieves what it is supposed to achieve. Monetary policy, and I'm going back to economics 111, which was years ago. But if you look at the South African approach and the approach in a lot of places in the world, monetary policy is responsible for keeping prices in check. In South Africa, it's not the primary growth mechanism. Fiscal policy is supposed to be the growth mechanism. Fiscal policy is supposed to be anti-cyclical. And we're seeing the complete opposite of that now. We're supposed to see fiscal policy now that stimulates growth. We're supposed to see fiscal policy that cuts taxes, that puts money back into the system. And we're seeing the complete opposite of that. We should not have gotten to a space where we needed to increase VAT by 2 percentage points. That shouldn't have happened.
But it did.
Yes.
Well, it didn't, but it wanted to happen.
Yeah, exactly. And we've had years of, let's be honest, promises about efficiencies. We're going to do this better. We're going to spend money more efficiently. And it hasn't happened. So if I think back about, to Minister Pravin Gordhan's days, I think that was probably the first time that we really saw announcements being made about we need to double down on where we're spending money, how we're doing that, how the SOEs are doing that. So, and that hasn't happened.
I mean, and we don't want to speak ill of the dead. And I mean, Tito Mboweni and Pravin Gordhan have died in the last year, and I mean, both remarkable South Africans. But this stuff started with Pravin writing blank checks and leaving people to fill in the numbers themselves, almost, when he became finance minister the first time round. Up until about 2008, I think we had the second lowest debt to GDP ratio in the world after Estonia at about 28% of proper countries. And we're now sitting at 76%. And I'm sorry to raise the point, but Pravin started it and then woke up to the fact that growth doesn't just happen, it isn't a magic wand, and then started talking the talk, but there was still no result of the talking, which is why we are in the mess that we're in.
Exactly. I felt that we just never got to a point where we realized that structurally, the economy that, started on a growth path in the early 2000s, we couldn't remain that way. We had to change, and we didn't fundamentally and structurally change the economy. If you think about some of the things that have benefited some of the other developing countries in the world that's seen remarkable growth, things like additional technology and, actually doubling down on that increasing productivity in economies. China's maybe a bit of an extreme example, but still, that is what we've seen, and we've not been able to capitalize on that. As we've seen technology expand as one thing, we've definitely not on the back of that said, okay, how are we going to use it to become more productive? How are we going to use it to produce more, cheaper, at better prices and become more competitive? We completely missed that. We did not restructure the economy when we were supposed to.
I traveled to Southeast Asia recently with a friend of mine. We were working on a project together. We were in Manila, and he'd been last in Manila 25 years ago. And I said, so what's changed? And because his jaw was on the ground. And he said, well, 25 years ago, Manila was like Braamfontein was 25 years ago. Not great, but fine. You know, you could walk the streets, there was business, there were offices, there was bustling, there was economic activity. Now you walk around Manila, and there are about 4 times as big as Sandton business districts, that as you walk through them, you could be in the City of London or in Manhattan, because they've made fundamental choices on growth. That has been the mission, and they're growing at 6% a year still. Ho Chi Minh, I was in Ho Chi Minh City. The economic activity there is terrifying in terms of its vibrancy, energy, and drive. Vietnam's growing at 6%. Horrible histories, colonialism. The Spaniards ran the Philippines for 300 years. The Americans had it for 50 years. You know, horrible colonial past. Civil war in Vietnam. Go forward. We need to fix the future, and that's what they're doing. And we're not. Why are we in this mess? And bear in mind, we have a time constraint.
Oh, my goodness. So I really think that Juanita and Lulu have actually done a brilliant job of already outlining why we're in this mess. So we are in this mess because we scored a lot of own goals to get ourselves here, Bruce. So this didn't automatically happen. It happened because there was a deliberate, intentional decision by the ANC-led government to loot the state coffers dry over a period of 10 years. And to Lulu's point, once you've created damage for such a long time, we are naive as a country to think that we can actually, you know, reverse that damage in over 2 years, as it were. So you don't seem to, I don't know whether you're not a proponent of GNU, Bruce, or you don't believe in it. I believe in it.
I'm a believer.
Really think,
I am a believer.
Oh, that's good. Because I really think that this is precisely where we needed to be as a country. Where we were was untenable, where we were was unsustainable. And I really believe that with the current administration that we have at the moment, with some of the ministers that you're actually seeing coming in, as much as a lot of them might not have done much, but when you listen to their vision, when you listen to their plans, when you listen to their true north, when you listen to, you know, where they actually like to take their departments and their ministries, you actually get inspired as a South African. You know, we are sitting in a position where it is just inspiring to observe a fish swimming. Ministers doing their jobs is just inspiring, because we've been subjected to so much incompetence and complacence over the past 10, 12, 15 years, you know, and what we're seeing is actually new. We even have a DTIC ministers who is pro-business, you know, because the previous one was a communist. So, and it really wasn't helping. He is pro-business, right? It was absolutely brilliant. So we are going somewhere. When he intervened against the Vodacom-Maziv deal, I thought that was actually brilliant. I thought, you know, for the first time, you know, we're actually going somewhere as a country. And I think when you look at the successes that this government of national unity have actually posted, and yes, a lot of the hard work was started by the previous ministers, but I really think to have as S&P and the Moody's actually reviewing, you know, the outlook for South Africa upwards tells us that we're actually on the right trajectory. The markets actually signaling the optimism that is currently happening on the country, you know, tells us that we're on the right trajectory. The business-government partnership that is doing well and has actually produced great results, and we are aiming that we'll achieve 3% economic growth this year. We didn't factor in Trump, though, but we're still hoping that we'll be able to still
we'll get to Trump. We'll get to Trump in a bit. Operation Vulindlela, just remind me who's involved?
In terms of
who are the main parties in Operation Vulindlela?
The people in the presidency, you mean?
Well, there's the presidency,
Yeah.
there's the treasury, and then there's the private sector. In the speech that never happened, the private sector doesn't get mentioned by the finance minister.
No, of course
I saw that as a glaring omission.
Yeah.
And is it significant?
You know, it's really neither here nor there. It would be great to get credits here and there, now and then, you know, but then anyway, it's neither here nor there. I think it was important that the private sector actually embarked alongside government to ensure that we actually rebuild this country. Remember, Bruce, we actively participated in the state capture project as the business community.
100%.
So we are actually not
When you say
doing
we,
anyone
it
a
was,
favor.
I mean, it was, you know, there were defined pockets, but yes, there were some in the private sector that were active participants.
Broadly, you know, there are others that didn't get a mention in the state capture, you know, report, Zondo Commission, or whatever the case is, but business in this country actively contributed to the industrial scale looting that we saw in this country. So now that it's time to rebuild the country, we actually had to come on board, you know, to provide the resources and to actually ensure that the hollowing out that we actively ensured that happened on SOEs is now actually reversed. So we have really seen a lot of progress in the areas of energy, transport, logistics, and crime and corruption, and we are actually tackling water at the moment. So I really think that where we have managed to get as a country, we have set a global, unique example of how developing economies can actually take this model of PPPs, you know, to actually turn the country around. And we are committed as the private sector, and we are actually willing to go all the way with the government, as long as they'll continue to have us.
You spent a little bit of time on the ESCOM board during a different period.
Yeah.
What's your assessment of what has been achieved, quite miraculously, frankly, in the past year?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's absolutely brilliant. So let me just say that they would not have been able to achieve it with us without the previous board being us.
Of course.
Yeah, of course. You know, I mean, we set the stage.
That's where the work happened.
So, yeah. So, but it was important, Bruce, because remember, we were the first board post-Zuma. We were the first board post the state capture project. So we walked into an organization that was really, you know, mired by a whole lot of issues, from governance, from culture issues, from staff morale, from, you know, all of those things. So never mind the business of generating electricity, that was not even half of our problems. So we really did a lot of work, you know, to ensure that those fundamentals, from an operations, from a systems perspective, from a processes perspective, from a people perspective, are actually taken care of, so that then when this board comes in, then they can actually only deal with the easy stuff. We dealt with the hard stuff.
You always have these glory boys who come along and then just take over. I'll let them tether no. And then Kyle, from a tax perspective, I mean, South Africa was, the ANC liberalized taxes in South Africa considerably. Tax rates plummeted up until 2008. The finance minister would stand up, and it was like he'd been shopping at the local nursery, bringing in different plants. It was lovely, and nothing could possibly go wrong, but it did. And now we sit with a problem where they say if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, and Treasury has seen the fact that they feel like they need more money because they've agreed to big increases for civil servants and many other things that they want to spend money on. And therefore, there's only one solution, and that is to raise taxes. And that has come through in the intention of what this budget was seeking to achieve. And I feel like the lemon has been squeezed, the juice is out, the rind is dry, and the pips are squeaking.
Spot on, Bruce. Look, and Lulu touched on it earlier around the expenditure side, and should we even be where we are? And that's actually the million-dollar question. But if you accept for the moment that all that expenditure is necessary and we need to go there, then we're left with no choices. We have to raise taxes. You're alluding to the relief that we had through the 2000s, particularly on a personal income tax front. All of that has been clawed back and more. We are at record levels from a personal income tax perspective in terms of the burden. It's right up there with the most developed countries in the world, that burden. So there is no room on that front, despite calls from some quarters to try and squeeze that lemon even harder. There is just no more to be gained from that. And they learned that lesson in a hard way when they increased the top marginal rate from 41% to 45%. At that point, they were warned you're going over the top here, you're making a terrible mistake, you're actually going to lose money, and it turns out in hindsight that's exactly what happened. They actually collected less revenue than they would have without the tax increase. Corporate tax, there's no hope for...
Well, it went from 28 to 27 fairly recently, and
We did.
you know, hopefully going to decline further, but that seems beyond possibility now.
Well, it's wishful thinking.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got to remember that 28 to 27 wasn't corporate tax relief. Yes, we reduced the rate, but it was on a revenue-neutral basis.
Yeah.
That did so by broadening the base. So take with one hand and give with the other, if you like. So, look, our corporate tax rates are higher than the global average. They are relatively high. And very broad-based. We don't have the sort of incentives that many other countries, particularly other African countries with whom we compete for investment, actually have. So there is just no room on the corporate tax side, and it is the most volatile tax, as we know. So you can't rely on it as a sustainable source and a reliable source of revenues that we actually need. So, the minister wanting to raise 60 billion rands worth of tax, which is unprecedented in one go, he was left with no choice in that sense, in terms of having to, as I said, if you accept the presumption that taxes had to be raised, he was left with no choice as to what lever he could pull.
Well, his job is to raise the money needed to fit into the budget requirements of government. And unless you're managing the requirements of the departments that are in government, they will just keep demanding more and more, and your job as the minister is to raise the revenue. It's not your job necessarily to cut the fat in every department. I don't think that's within his authority to do so. So it's a much bigger political conversation.
Look, it's obviously an inherently political decision, and it's not solely his decision and so on. And the problem is the approach that they've taken to cutting expenditure over the last number of years has been to take a blanket approach, haircuts across the board and so on. And we've seen that coming back as the problem. I don't think too many people would quibble with the need for more teachers, more doctors, more nurses and so on. But that problem arose because of the approach they took to cutting expenditure, rather than a more targeted approach, getting rid of the programs, even possibly entire departments.
Do we need a Doge?
We have it, by the way.
It's very quiet. What we need is a Doge standing next to the president. Maybe bring the kids. I don't know.
We need Bruce, we
have
need
a
a Doge
department
light.
It's not very effective, though.
Performance monitoring and evaluation, that's very doji to me.
It's very doji, but it's not nearly as catchy or visible. Does it do any good? Clearly not.
No, I mean, we have 4 iterations of it. We have Public Service Commission, we have Performance Monitoring and Evaluation, we have Public Service and Administration Department, and we have all of these parallel departments in the presidency. So when it comes to oversight and performance evaluation, I believe a lot of government departments exist just for that. So we're very...
So maybe if you stopped spending money on them...
Perhaps. No, but I mean, I'm being facetious, but that's the irony of the Zuma years, that they set up these really wonderful performance monitoring tools that bring anything but that.
Yeah. And lots of questions from the Eastern Cape. People in the Eastern Cape are quite cross.
Okay.
The 2% VAT rate is so crude. This is actually a Joburg question. I beg your pardon. The 2% VAT rate is so crude, no attempt at other sources of revenue. Is it not subterfuge to enable cutting back on the civil service? Is it not a subterfuge to enable cutting back the civil service politically possible in the always intended, my goodness gracious me. I think you've left some words out, Joburg. But okay, so the 2% VAT rate was crude. Can we not just cut the damn civil service, I think is the tone of the question. And massive increases in civil service wages. The only people who really are benefiting in this democracy are civil servants and the politicians who don't seem to get the cuts that come through. Busi, you're nodding.
We definitely should be cutting that and a whole lot of other fat that is there in the budget, you know, and I really think there are a lot of inefficiencies broadly in government. So for them to think that an average South African should actually be burdened with VAT of more than 2% is absolutely crazy, especially in a country of 43% unemployment in terms of the expanded definition, where more of our people are actually living in poverty, where you have more people that are unemployed than those that are employed in all the provinces except Gauteng and the Western Cape. It really doesn't make sense. And I really think that if we really want to see an uptick in economic growth, the path that we're on, Bruce, as a country, of seemingly, we're not going to call it privatization, because privatization is a swear word, of private sector participation. You know, where you've got these 743 SOEs, all of them are dysfunctional, all of them are draining government in some form or the other. You'd start to introduce private sector participation so that then government doesn't have to continue carrying the burden. But more importantly, you start creating a conducive environment within which business should operate. And to Lulu's point earlier on, it therefore starts to reverse, you know, this issue of business confidence that actually hasn't been there. We can therefore start redirecting or seeing foreign direct investment being redirected back to South Africa because you've got a conducive environment within which business operates. And I really think that that is actually the path.
Thank you for teeing that up so nicely for Quinita, because the omission of mentioning business in Operation Vulindlela, that subtle omission, harmless omission, is not a harmless omission. It is the ideological fault line that prevents government, and I've said this many times, so for those of you who heard it, I apologize, but standing with Pravin Gordhan in Davos, tell me you've been to Davos without saying I've been to Davos. Standing with Pravin Gordhan in Davos years ago, and saying, I fly SAA weekly, sometimes 2-3 times, the staff are great, the pilots are great, the aircraft fly. It's a wonderful product and a wonderful brand, but we know that it is being pillaged from the inside. You know it, I know it. Why not just give it away?
Exactly.
And save the fiscus? And he went, over my dead body.
Yeah.
So the day they announced that Takatso deal, it was a terrible deal. But I sent him a WhatsApp. And I said, are you feeling okay?
Nothing like a smug journalist.
And there were 2 blue ticks, and we didn't talk after that. But it was fine. I'd made the point. But it's this absolute aversion to the bleeding obvious, because it is the antithesis of everything that they believe they should be doing as the ANC in government, where the ANC has this addiction to state-controlled everything.
Yeah. So it's, I mean, when you say the swear word, it's less of a swear word now, because water is the issue. Now, I want to shift your attention, Bruce, to a very boring topic, which is...
Excellent.
which is the financing of local government.
Yeah.
The financing of what?
Of local government.
Oh, yes.
It is an untenable, completely... The system doesn't work. It will never work.
Yeah.
It won't. But when that conversation is brought into any room, we are handed a little pill, which is actually like a blue M&M that says, no, we have a district development model, nyana, whatever, right? The failure of local government was, what do you economists say, quickly and then what? Suddenly and then quickly. Well,
Slowly and
slowly and then,
suddenly.
suddenly. But the point of that is that we can see this decline that will have fundamental consequences in ways that maybe ESCOM didn't damage the economy, right? I think it would be that level of damage when it eventually explodes, and we're there, right? And yet, the president knows it, that says, businesses do not invest in the union buildings. Businesses invest in the Merafong municipality.
Absolutely.
But you have an untenable financing model that doesn't work. You have Joburg being Joburg, right? And we now refuse to talk about this thing which is private, with the role of business. Now, when I was here before, I criticized business to say, for many years, business shouted at government to say, like a kid, do your homework, do your homework, do your homework. And then business just said, well, I'm tired of shouting, I'm just going to do the homework. And I draw concern about that, because I said, it's not cute for companies to make robots work. It's not cute. It's not your job. Your job is to make money. It's Dada Morero's job to make sure robots work in Rosebank.
Does he know?
Right. Well,
if we told him, maybe you'd do it.
So I am conscious about when we celebrate or when we advocate for this business participation, and we have this test case now in the form of Eskom and the form of electricity stability, there has to be guardrails where we don't essentially say,
outsource it to the private sector and it'll be fixed.
and it's giving money to a drug addict. We can't do
Yes.
that, right? And so it needs to. And so this question that you asked is important. Why are you celebrating Vulindlela when you're not mentioning the most important arm of this initiative, which is business?
Which then goes to one of the questions from Slummies, from East London. Do you believe the GNU has the necessary political courage, interesting choice of words, to cut the public sector wage bill as opposed to the risky approach of increasing VAT? What are your views regarding the implications of cutting the public sector wage bill, both good and bad?
No courage.
No courage.
No, I think they do. I really think they do. I think they will have the courage.
They will?
Actually, I really think they do. I mean, if they could stop the budget on Wednesday, I think that for me spoke volumes. It said to me that we're sitting with the government of national unity, or 10 other political parties at least, or the majority of them, who are not there to rubber stamp the decisions of the ANC. And I really think that there was a fundamental marker and shift that happened on the 29th of May 2024, where we were liberated as a country from useless and stupid policy decisions being made in Luthuli House and rubber stamped in Parliament. There's no rubber stamping now. You know, the GNU said, you know what, as much as this might actually cause an outcry, you know, internationally and domestically, but we are actually going to stop this show. You know, we are not here to please and indulge the ANC. You know, and I think they really, you know, took them to task, and they actually made sure that they actually stopped this thing. So I think knowing the implications that the market and the international community, and it could really dent the brilliant work they've done over the past 10 months, they decided to do it anyway. So I really think that if we could stop the budget, then definitely. But I think they can actually, you know, go to. But I wonder, you know, where the unions would be sitting there and how we then deal with it.
And I think you're right. There's one example where they have done it, have allowed it to happen, the post office.
Exactly. And the NHI, do you know the NHI is no longer continuing?
Pardon?
Okay, the NHI is another example.
Yeah.
You're not going to have that stupid policy being implemented.
Yeah, no,
we're on to something, right?
but do you, I mean, what is you mention it less and less, a bit like the National Development Plan.
Yeah.
Eventually nobody talks about it anymore.
Yeah, no, it's going to
Like
die.
e-tolls.
Yeah. What?
Yeah, exactly.
But there's the problem. E-tolls still have to be paid for.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons why we've got a hole in the budget. It's one of the many reasons. The problem doesn't go away just because you stop talking about it. It still exists. Just the remedy is different. Kyle, do we have a revenue problem?
No,
So we've got a spending problem.
we've got a spending problem.
So actually we don't need to raise taxes at all.
No,
just need to
I
slash
think
a bit.
we've got to look. I mean, our tax burden is at record levels. It's never been higher than it currently is. By developing sort of middle-income country standards, we've got a very high tax burden. I mean, I don't think there's no other middle-income country that comes close to South Africa in terms of the tax burden. So no, we don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. I mean, the one aspect that we were talking about earlier that I did want to touch on was SACU,
Pardon?
Southern African Customs Union.
I thought you were saying you're being sarky. Sorry, I was getting which I was.
So-
So South African Customs Union, we've all heard about it, and it's explained what it is for the uninitiated and why it matters.
I'll get to that, but it's a classic case of where again government hasn't been dealing with the stuff they needed to deal with. So the Customs Union is exactly that, what it sounds like. Free trade bloc between South Africa, Namibia, Lesotho, Eswatini, and Botswana. Gives, from a South African perspective, duty-free access to those countries and vice versa, of course.
Brilliant, because we export much more to them than they export to us, right? So therefore,
absolutely.
it should be a net
Absolutely.
benefit.
Mostly what we export to them, though, is money. No, we export around about 200 billion rands in goods to those countries on an annual basis and so on. So it's not peanuts. But the problem is that in this financial year that we're sitting in, we are paying those countries 90 billion rand as part of the revenue sharing under the SARCU agreement.
Wow.
So we've got an agreement that we export goods to each other. We have a disproportionate number of goods going to you. Therefore, that would harm you. Therefore, we pay you to take our goods that we export duty-free.
In effect, so this is where the revenue sharing formula comes in, which is meant to be an equitable formula to compensate for various things, losses of revenues, loss of ability to set your own fiscal policy, at least in terms of tariffs and trade is concerned, and all that sort of thing. But it's costing South Africa a fortune, and you got to question what the benefits of that are.
So when was this set up? Who set it up, and why did they set it up? Because it doesn't seem like it is in perhaps our best interests.
Interesting. SARCU's actually been in place since 1910. It's the oldest active customs union in the world, by the way. But the current position is that the current formula in terms of revenue sharing has been in place since 2002.
That's Alec Owen time.
It's long. And South Africa's been...
Why don't you just name and shame? Come on.
So look, I mean, the problem is, when that was negotiated, the revenue sharing formula was weighted heavily in favor of the other countries. And at that time, maybe it made sense, maybe it didn't. But South Africa's realized that there's a problem. They've been trying to renegotiate since 2011. And of course, these other countries haven't been prepared to do so. And bearing in mind...
We've got a great example, though, of a different kind of negotiating tactic where you just stop doing what you've been doing up until now, and you tell your neighbors, suck it up. It's not nice, it's not polite, it's not good for good neighborliness, as we've seen with Mexico and Canada.
Well, that's the one possibility, Bruce, and of course South Africa's never been prepared to do that. That's not their approach to certainly regional diplomatic matters and so on, is that they do not do that sort of thing. But
if we did cut it, it would force a renegotiation.
We could. We could do it.
Wouldn't be nice.
Are we prepared to do it, though, as a country? And that's the problem. Because, look, those countries, they get about, some of them, more than 50% of their revenues comes from SARCU. So if you had to pull the rug out from underneath them, that would plunge them, obviously, into a fiscal crisis as well, which we don't want to do. But South Africa's never been prepared to use the leverage it does have to force the negotiation, which would be threatened withdrawal from SARCU.
But 90 billion, I mean, and we wouldn't get it all back should that happen, but it's an example of a policy made with good intent more than 20 years ago, which could possibly be reviewed, tweaked, changed, altered to make it more advantageous. And if there's one, there may be others.
100%. So this country is in a fiscal crisis. And we cannot get away from that. And we need to be taking all the steps that we should be taking to address that fiscal crisis, including reconsidering these sorts of arrangements that cost the country a fortune for questionable benefits. I'm not going to say there are no benefits, but the value of those benefits is questionable in the context of what we're actually having to pay for that. And so it's something that as a country we need to look at, and unfortunately that's a line item on the budget that's never spoken about, largely because it gets hidden away.
Sure. And what else is hidden? No, but it is, and that's the revenue that the finance minister wants to raise this year. That would, hypothetically anyway, more than compensate for that 2%
that is
back.
exactly the point.
And that's about budgeting more smartly, perhaps, rather than budgeting as aggressively as is being done.
Yeah. So it's not a quick fix, but by any stretch of the imagination, but it's something that we should have done years ago, just the same as we should have been cutting expenditure in the right places years ago. And we need to start doing those things, and we need to start doing them urgently. Otherwise, we'll be having this conversation again when the VAT rate goes to 20% in 2 years' time.
Yeah.
Can I weigh in on that?
Of course.
The creativity that's needed to what you're saying, cut in the right places, is there's no appetite to be creative in that regard. And so there's just this kind of sort of shoulder shrugging that says, well, we're not going to get the 2% VAT percentage point VAT increase, so, well, teachers and doctors and nurses are going to be unemployed in KZN and Cape Town, but we tried to solve the problem, but oopsie, okay, we're going to have more ECD centers. Well, too bad. Now, that level of I don't know if it's like this mix between indifference and mediocrity that just kind of gets us like, well, it ought to have been business as normal So we're trying to get a different result by doing the same things. And so similarly, when that conversation around, oh, we need this increased revenue because PRASA, we need to fix PRASA. Nobody's talking about what broke PRASA. And that for me is the interesting thing, is that we're not learning the lessons in the fixing process.
And throwing good money after bad when you haven't got these things fixed, as dealt with the fundamental issues of corruption, incompetence, and the destruction of infrastructure over time is absolutely fundamental. But we're kind of bored of talking, and we need some doing. Are some suggestions, mostly from the Eastern Cape, of employing Elon Musk to solve the problem. I'm not sure that he'd be that keen. He wouldn't get all the positive attention he gets at home. Lots of similar issues on alternatives. So the finance minister has indicated that government will be looking to raise funds elsewhere rather than raising VAT. What do you think will be the other ways he's considering to raise these funds? I mean, there are only two ways, right? There's tax and there's borrowing. You've already said, Kyle, that tax is not an option. The finance minister has already said borrowing is not an option. So surely the third alternative is cutting. And that's politically unpalatable. And what the ANC has got, though, in its corner is somebody to blame for it. They could just blame the opposition parties that have forced their hands. Politically, I guess that is what is likely to happen, Lulu.
Yeah, I wanted to add a third option there, and I realized that it's a little bit more difficult probably in the current circumstances, and I want to actually react to Kyle's comment about we don't have a revenue problem. We don't have a revenue problem, but I think we have a revenue base problem and a growth problem. That is not happening. And I think cutting, yes, that is an option, but it absolutely needs to be in the right areas. And if I just hear about, Juanita mentioned a lot of the reasons that were given for the VAT increase, and basically, in my opinion, okay, bar maybe doctors and teachers, although we still need to talk about the effectiveness of the healthcare system and the education system, that's another thing. I don't feel like any of this is directed to actually
driving growth.
And actually focusing on economic infrastructure in the broader sense of the word. That is what I am fundamentally missing in this conversation. So yes, we can cut spending. There's been talk for years now to say, should we not look at, I almost said, zero-based budget. I almost said net zero budget. But a zero-based budget where we really investigate spending. Now, I realize that, if you look at some countries that have done this, it's easier maybe to do it in private sector. It's costly. And it is expensive, but there are definitely some principles that we can look at. I just feel like, to Juanita's point, it's just like blanket, oh, well, it's going to be too costly, so we do not do anything. We don't take certain parts of our expenditure and ask questions about the relevance, the validity thereof. This has grown outside of what it should be. Should it even be there at all? And I just feel like it's a cop-out to say we can't do a zero-based budget. It's too complex, so we just don't do anything. We need to focus on cutting out expenditure that is not necessary, but I also think at the same time we are not focusing enough on where we actually need spending to generate growth. So that part of the conversation is just, it's vague. I feel that is uninspiring, to be honest. I think there has been a lot that's been said, but I just don't feel like there's the fundamental, and I've mentioned it earlier, things that we are talking about, like how do we make sure that the labor market that we deal with at the moment is relevant for the economic circumstances that we deal with? How do we make sure that the technology is going into the right sectors? How do we make things to sell?
No, so and many people, and these are many questions are coming from the Eastern Cape, which, as we know, has got a massive unemployment issue, which is also, it's forgotten in terms of infrastructure, and which is weird considering the origins of the ANC. And people are clearly frustrated. There are several questions that come through saying, the first problem, actually, we're looking at national issues, we're looking at global issues. The first problem is local government. And when local government fails,
Yeah.
small businesses
Yeah.
fail. And we've seen the moving of the cheese factory
Yeah.
from,
My hometown.
from Lichtenberg
Yeah.
because the town failed, for example. And there'll be many other examples of businesses we've never heard of,
Yeah.
which just quietly slip away because the next generation of family can't bear to go through the pain that their parents went through and let it fail. Konita, and then to you, Busi.
Yeah, I mean, this is something we need 2 hours on local government, because I think all the problems, if you want to see the symptoms of political problems, it lies in local government. If you want to see South Africa as a microcosm, look at local government,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so So we beyond a service delivery problem conversation. There's no way that these municipalities can actually deliver water anymore and fix roads. So we pass that to say municipalities are going to deliver their services. They actually can't. Why they can't? Because they've completely been hollowed out, and because they're not funded in a way that most of their budgets that are collected in a completely unsustainable way goes to salaries. So you can't, what's left for services? Nothing, right? I did my, and then this is a humble brag also, my master's project on Maluti Apufong, right? Which I think worst run municipality, or among the worst run municipalities.
It's quite a tough contest, that. If you want to be like number one amongst the worst, you've got lots of competition.
But what you find there is the cesspit of political corruption, right?
Yeah.
Inefficiency, right? But then you also have a very robust sort of, what do they call them? Residence forums, wherever. But that push and pull between, this local forum of, I forget what they call themselves, going to court to force the municipality to pick up dirt, etc., etc. Now they themselves have realized, oh my goodness, there's only so much opposition that we can. There is just no money left.
Exactly. Yep.
I was at the municipal offices where a lady who came to dispute her bill was so upset at how dirty the offices was. She took a broom and she started sweeping. I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
Inside a municipal office.
Yes.
And so
There was a broom, or did you bring her own? I'm a serious question.
But I mean, that's just the point, Bruce, that when the president says, in his State of the Nation address, there needs to be a relook at the white paper. What did he say? White paper on local government?
About reforms.
Yeah, which, I mean, guys, we know how slow this process is. And if there's any part of the state that business needs to breathe down the neck of government, yes, water, but most of fixing water sits at local government.
Sorry, Busi, you want to make a point?
I absolutely agree with Juanita, but I think probably maybe where I might disagree with you on, Juanita, is the issue about funding. I don't know if the problem mainly, and you didn't say mainly, but I don't know how much funding is a factor. I really think it's a function of, if you talk about the failure of leadership and of management, of people doing their own jobs, local government is a classical example of it. Because when we spoke about the fact that cadre deployment was one of the biggest issues that led to the fundamental problems that we face as a country, that manifested itself mainly there, on local government. Because remember, people who go to local government, I just have to sit unemployed with nothing to do, and I've probably maybe failed everywhere else, failed as an entrepreneur, failed in corporate South Africa, and I just need to have 12 friends to go and be an ANC member. Is it still 12 friends? 12 friends to be an ANC member.
I've never applied.
Join a branch, and you see how loudly I speak. Just go to a branch and speak as loudly as I am doing. Doesn't matter whether I make sense or not. And then somehow I get parachuted into branch leadership and then municipality. And then, you're sitting there with people who have never even run a spaza shop. And we are now giving them 5 trillion rands economy to manage. What did we think was going to happen? So it's a classical case of thieves. It's really thieves.
And
Ruth
who are the
is a
s-
classical
Yeah.
case of thieves masquerading as government officials.
And who are
That's
the-
why we're here.
and who are the
Municipalities
suckers?
will never work in this
Who
country.
are the suckers? We're the suckers. I mean, that's the best return on investment you can get anywhere in the world. $12 to trillions. I mean, but I'm going to give you an. I'm going to give.
And now in municipalities in KZN, now you have a
24 minutes.
coalition of thieves of MK party. It's going to be worse, you know?
She cares, which is important, and it's. I'll give you an example. This will make Busi cross as well, because I'm not sure that she's cross enough yet. So, there's a question here. So this is not me talking about a book that I wrote, because you wrote talk about your masters. So I got a bee in my bonnet and approached my publishers in June last year, and I said, if I can turn around a book in a month, will you publish it? And we've got a bit of a track record, and I said, sure, if you can pull that off, Mr. Never made a deadline in his life, of course we'll do it. And I sent WhatsApps to more than 100 people who were in my phone, and I said, if you could do one thing to fix the future as president for just half an hour, what would that one small thing be? And went to Gqeberha, to the Eastern Cape, to visit my brother over a weekend. And I said, show me what you're up to. And he'd got a bee in his bonnet during COVID and gone out and fixed the potholes in his road. And the Herald had taken a picture. And next thing, a homeless shelter contacted my brother saying, we've got some guys who want to get some extra cash. Do you mind offering them a job? And so they expanded the pothole fixing, and this took on a bit of a life on its own. And as the COVID restrictions lifted, it went into fixing the verges in central, in downtown Gqeberha. And not long after that came the appeal for, can you clean up St. George's Park, please? Because it's been overgrown. There are about 300 homeless people living there. It's a public space. Nobody's using it. So my brother went in there, much to my sister-in-law's delight, using his own money, with these homeless guys. And suddenly the park started improving. Suddenly crime rates around the park started dropping. Local businesses around the St. George's Park started saying, can we provide some funding, please, because this is having a positive effect. And soon after that, I made an application for St. George's Park to get a park run in. Now, every Saturday morning, 600 people turn up and do a park run. I was walking around with my brother, and I went, so who are those people in overalls on their phones while these guys, these guys who live in the shelter are doing the work? He goes, oh, no, they're waiting for their tea break. Those are the council workers. And how do you, he says, well, I can get cross, but what's the point? They're not going to do the job anyway. No. So we are doubling down and doing it on a voluntary basis and taking, and improving it. And I wonder whether, as frustrating and as angering as that is, it achieves a result, and it's a principle-based result based on residents of that city who are going this far and no further. It doesn't solve the problem, but it makes it a more pleasant environment to be in.
Can I be as angry as Busi in this one?
Go on.
That is giving money to a drug addict, because
Yes, I know.
the budget of that local municipality or that metro is allocated to fix that park, and it's also inflated. You would find, if you go through that budget, they're probably spending 8 million rand to fix on a recovery project of that same park that the private sector.
So how do they get forced to do their bloody jobs?
Is activism that we saw in ESCOM, which is, we're breathing down your neck with every move you make, and we're helping you. So the help is contingent to this extreme oversight. And that has to be done. If ever there's a place for it to be done, it's in Joburg. Remember, DA mayors will tell you this. Jordan Hill-Lewis is a lovely guy, will tell you this. A lot of the reason why Cape Town works is because it has to work.
Yeah.
Because, and there was that municipality that the DA used to boast about in the South, Vereniging, what is it?
Sedibeng.
No, not Sedibeng, the opposite of Sedibeng.
Midval.
Midval, right? Because it's a tale of two municipalities. Imfuleni, terribly run. There's a road, and then there's Midval, right? But why did Midval work? Because when was it Ghana? Who was the premier? The mayor, I'll remember him now. Magashule Ghana. When he was the premier there was no room to those farmers, those business owners looked at every single element of the budget and objected.
Yeah. Yep.
So you can't, the ESCOM turnaround was not business saying, like, okay, we're doing it. Yes, it was a bit of this, but it was boozy black, threatening government, to the where Josienzo Ramaphosa has realized, I can't misstep here, and that is the energy we need for Joburg. Let's start with Joburg.
But every municipality
Every
needs,
municipality.
needs actually to be recaptured.
Bruce, it actually does, but for me, it's definitely the active citizenry that Conita is talking about. But I think when you look at the difference between municipalities that are succeeding and those that are failing, it all stems down to who is at the helm. I really don't think we realize, the importance of leadership. And it's interesting because leadership seems like such an over-exaggerated concept until it is
Fundamental.
no longer there.
Yeah.
Once it's no longer there, because while it's still there, this thing looks like it's on autopilot. And once you have the right people in place, then this thing really just turns around. So I really think that as much as we can do all of these other things, we need to get the right people in power. And yes, I agree, Juanita, that it might actually take time from an institutional reform perspective, but I really think that once we get those in place and ensure that we force municipalities to ring-fence their water revenue, their electricity revenue, and all the and have national government intervening. I think that has been another problem because you have provincial government, local government, and national government all being autonomies. So national government can't tell local government what to do. You can actually give them their allocation from national treasury, and in 24 hours they can steal all of it. And there's nothing that national government can do. So I really think once you put such guardrails in place, then it actually starts helping.
Because
So those reforms are important.
that big ESCOM problem, which is municipal debt, which is, what is it now?
It's about 100 billion rands. Can you believe 10 years ago it was 5 billion rands? So it has grown by 5 billion to 100 billion.
But I'm saying when
They've stolen it.
yeah, literally. Because where are you getting revenue from? The only revenue that you get from as local government is from
Ratepayers, yeah.
from people paying for the electricity. And then what happens is you don't deliver electricity, ESCOM cuts you, but the people who have to pay. But, Durban is a very good example of what you're saying about why leadership matters. Durban I have never seen rapid decline like Durban.
Yeah.
Right? Under a mayor who actually was an Amapiano DJ. Let's not talk about that. but honestly speaking, only when in 3 months, when a new mayor comes in, there's this enormous turnaround. And we say, well, you had the tools of change. This could have been prevented.
Yep.
And it does go to the point that the right people in the right places doing the right things at the right times make all the difference in the world. Yet we only have ourselves to blame because and this is broadly speaking, have continued to vote for the same outcomes
Absolutely.
time and time and time again.
Yeah.
And we gave permission.
Yeah.
We said,
Yeah.
we love what you guys are doing. Please carry on. That's our fault.
Bruce, I've never been more proud to be a South African on the 29th of May 2024 because what South Africans did, we drew a line in the sand and said enough and no more. We said we refuse, to continue with this rubbish anymore. And I was worried at some point that we were actually going to go the same direction like all other African countries who continue to have this blind loyalty to the liberating movements, even when they are messing up. 30 years too late, but anyway, in 30 years we said enough and no more, and I really think we're on the right path now.
Which is why Wednesday was so important, back to to Quinita's point right at the very beginning. The Government of National Unity has seemed a little bit impotent up until this point, and suddenly it, I don't know, got a dose of Viagra or whatever it is, and has gone this far and no further. So what does Budget 2025 look like in the middle of March? How does it change? Kyle.
Gee, thanks, Bruce.
Anytime.
I don't know.
Okay, if you were finance minister for just half an hour, hypothetically, and you could change just one thing in the budget, what would it be to mitigate the mess that we found ourselves in at 12:30 on Wednesday?
Hopefully, what we will see is some of this target expenditure cutting
Yes.
taking place. How much they can do in 3 weeks, I don't know. Hopefully there is a review document that's been
I have
done,
no
sitting,
doubt
gathering dust
that
somewhere,
opposition parties have been thinking about
and they can
this.
dust
for a
this
while,
thing
yeah?
off and implement some of it in the space of 3 weeks. That's what I hope. How far we get, I don't know. The reality is we must still be staring at a tax increase. Hopefully it's 1% VAT, not 2%
So
VAT.
when we get 1%, we go, whew, that was close. It's still
But-
1% that never goes away. It's,
There's a big but attached to that. That is conditional on further things taking place over the course of the next year. So when you get to next year's budget, which hopefully takes place in February, that there is more substantial targeted cutting that takes place and so on. That is what we need to do. Whether that happens remains to be seen, but I'm hopeful that we'll at least see some of it, the start of that taking place. in
we'll
the
see.
next
You're
budget.
finance minister for just half an hour. And you could do just one thing, to change the budget, to make it stick. What would it be?
You know, I don't know if it's one thing, Bruce, but I think from where we were sitting, from a BLSA perspective, we were saying that this budget is going to have to ensure that we live within our means. It's going to ensure that we actually cut, focus on spending, and we're going to have to ensure that we actually prioritize the creation of sustainable jobs and economic growth. So that means a whole lot of things, but whatever line items you have in there, as long as they push us in that direction, then we would have won as a country.
Lulu?
I think it is a bit of a complex
Of course it's
system of
complex,
things.
which is
Yes.
why we're asking the question.
I mean, what I wanted to say is what I said earlier, we should never have gotten here, and it's going to take some time to turn around. However, I think the most important thing is actually forcing accountability. At the moment, and you spoke about it earlier, the government departments, local government, everybody gets the money and to do with what they do. But the accountability is not there, in spite of all the measurement and monitoring and evaluation, etc. That accountability is not there. So forcing accountability, making it conditional. We've had a few years of, we're going to do this, but only if you do this. And we don't push through on that. It's like a mother warning a child, oh, there's going to be consequences, and it just never happens. So the actual consequences of those interventions needs to happen.
Quinita.
I will never take the job. I don't know.
Unfortunately,
I last did maths in grade 8.
Unfortunately, you've been selected, you've been chosen, you've been deployed.
I mean, I think that the easiest thing to do is just, piss off the trade unions and
It's a fight that's long overdue, isn't it?
do it. You have nothing to lose. Your country is on the brink. I mean, if you're...
Does that push it over?
No, it doesn't.
Why not? Why is it safe to pick a fight with the unions at this point?
Because you're going to be bankrupt anyways, and they're not going to have jobs anyways.
True.
So, we're being facetious, but at the end of the day, you're sitting at 75%.
76.
76%.
We're going to stabilize at 70 something
Right.
Yeah.
next year.
So
That's, I think,
we,
the tone of it.
we borrowed and borrowed and borrowed so that we can have, I don't even know what the amount is, a few million people earning a decent, comfortable rate. That's bad for your economy. We don't even have to debate it in this room anymore, right? So I think that's what I would do. The second thing is, as the finance minister, okay, so government ministers from all the different parties, as I said, are on this elaborate audition. They all need money to roll out programs, right? Because the Minister of Home Affairs is from the DA. If he gets that national digital register thing the President spoke about, he is winning in the next election, right? The Minister of Education needs broadband through her DA minister, other minister of telecommunications in schools, right? Again, they need money for it, right? So I think as the finance minister, take advantage of the enthusiasm of your colleagues and say, come up with creative solutions. Don't do the stupid thing of saying, okay, well, we were going to go to VAT, we were going to increase VAT, and now we can't, so yeah, let's have all the doctors unemployed sitting at home. We can't do that.
Yeah.
Because that's always been that arrogance of government.
Absolutely.
To say, you guys, you see, roads are falling apart because you guys didn't want to pay for e-tolls. But not getting to the fundamental questions that you had a bad idea to start with.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think that, if anything, the President and the Minister of Finance can force creativity in departments, and the budget vote speeches that follow this process must be radically different to what we know.
Solutions orientated rather than whiny whinging. I've got some ideas. So I've got some things. I
And it's not take a lot.
I'm trying to cover up the label. So if we're going to make the budget stick, we've got wood glue. But this takes preparation and stuff. You've got to sand the wood down and glue. I'm not sure that that's necessarily the right thing. Got super glue. It works really, really quickly, but it's quite brittle, and so the solution doesn't really hold very long. We got the stuff that got to the moon before Neil Armstrong, Prattley Putty. And this is quite a good one, because actually it takes two different components that you have to mix together, and then you get an epoxy which holds rather well. But my favorite one, I think, and the only way we're going to get it to stick, is we take the stuff and we tie everybody to the damn chairs until they find a solution. And they're not allowed to be released.
Exactly.
Because this stuff's unbreakable, and that's duct tape. It's absolutely unbreakable. I think that's the only way to make the budget stick, is to force people. But you see, that's not very democratic, Juanita.
John Steenhuisen's mouth, or what?
And others. It does have that multiple purpose. I always get to say it, but thank you for doing it. Last thoughts then on global pressures on South Africa, because the budget is not something in isolation. We run the risk of falling foul of Donald Trump's scatterbrained approach to policy, where he makes so many different announcements and so many different decisions, nobody can really keep track, but is determined to implement, because if 1% of what he says lands, he looks like a superhero to his constituency. AGOA, no doubt, will be in his sights. Giving away America's money to people who don't love, support, and worship him is untenable to him. It feels like that is the next catastrophe that we'll have to deal with. How do we need to save AGOA? Do we need to say to Donald Trump, fine, do away with AGOA, we'll do a direct deal with you? Last thought on AGOA. Maybe not everybody, because the economist can do it, I think. And then the political person can do it, to wrap up.
So I think my problem with this is there is an emotional and ideological reaction immediately to Donald Trump, which then overshadows some of the logical things, I suppose. And we were talking about being the adult in the room. So I was having a conversation with somebody else the other day about something that really upsets me, and he told me, don't be little Lulu, be adult Lulu about this. So I suppose we'll have to be adult South Africa about this. But at the same time, I can't help to say, but, if you're ticking off everybody else, your friends, everybody, should we not all go and stand on one side and say, go away? What would a world without the US look like? I realize.
However, our biggest mates in BRICS, which is now BRICS and but 27 letters.
Yes.
Don't ask me to repeat it. And Russia has got Donald Trump eating out of the palm of his hand, and that's supposed to be our bestie. And Narendra Modi is playing Washington like a harpsichord.
Oh, he knows how to do
that.
And
so our besties in the world, theoretically the global south, are playing a far smarter game than we are. Kenya's playing a far smarter game than we are. And we are almost going out there, hit me. Come on.
Yeah.
I challenge you. Hit me. Hit me.
Yeah.
I dare you.
Yeah.
He might just do that.
Yeah, and that's why I'm saying we need to try and be unemotional and adult about how we react to this and think through the consequences of certain of our actions. But on the other hand, if we do allow him to bully us into submission around certain things, at what point is it going to stop? At
Yeah.
what point are you going to say no more? And is it going to come with the next thing and the next thing? So I think it needs to be a very strategically and well thought through process. And that is where I think Modi, and I've been saying it for years, seems to be have been playing both sides of the fence so much better than we've been able to. So, yeah, it is a terminology that I actually heard that came out in the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report is minilateral agreements. So I think we might have to come with certain solutions around that, see how we work with certain people around us. And when you mentioned SACU earlier, I was thinking about how many years have we been saying, oh, but we need to do this, we need to reindustrialize, we need to think about how do we work with our neighbors, and we haven't done that.
Yeah.
So SACU wouldn't have been the problem that it is if we've been able to do that. So I think we need to look just a little bit closer to the border in terms of coming up with certain solutions, but we also have to keep a cool head around certain of these things and take it on a case-by-case basis.
PwC, 30 seconds if you can.
Oh my goodness, I can't talk for only 30 seconds. Okay, let me try. Bruce, I think the thing about the US-SA relationship, I think is a very concerning one for me because I don't think there are any short-term fixes. You know, Donald Trump is normally known as impulsive, but what he's doing in as far as South Africa is concerned, it's actually very deliberate. It's actually very intentional. It's actually very strategic. You know, if we think that we can just go to Washington, D.C. and explain the expropriation bill, it's bigger than that. You know, it's about Lady R. It's about renaming Sandton Drive to Leila Khalid, or the decision that we took to do that. It is about supporting Hamas. It is about military drills with China and whatever the case. It's about all of those things. So unfortunately, you know, it has already been established as fact in the minds of Washington, D.C. that South Africa is no longer an ally.
Not a
And I
friend,
think
yeah.
we're moving towards an era globally where trade is going to be between friends. So if you are not my friend, you are not my, if you are not my friend, you are definitely my enemy. So the US is probably asking themselves to say, why, by the way, do we continue to give money to these people when they poke us in the eye every opportunity they get, and they don't have to give us the aid? So as I think Lulu is saying, we're going to have to try and come up with alternatives of how we actually plug this gap, but we are going to take pain in the short term. So I think there's going to have to be a strategy around de-escalating the tension, and I'm worried that the G2G relationship has failed, so we're trying to explore if maybe there could be a B2G engagement. You know, come with, I don't know, whatever it is that we can actually offer to ensure that the 450 jobs in South Africa that are actually supported by US companies are actually not, or companies that are actually doing trade with the US are actually sustained. So I really think that there's unfortunately no silver bullet. Yes, we're going to have to try and see how we appease them so that the damage is not bad in the short term, but in the medium and long term, to Lulu's point, you know, let's find other avenues and other markets to try and deal with this mess.
Last word, Juanita.
I think that the conversation from former State Department officials to our diplomats was that don't blink, right? Because if you do, if you start conceding,
Show weakness and you will die.
yeah, right? So I think there's two scenarios. There's the Trump madness, that I like to call it, and then a real diplomatic hot potato, which is AGOA and, right? So there's this duality. The lesson that South Africa has to learn is that you can't have the moral high ground when you've been doing some dodgy things. Right?
Yeah.
So again, as the president will, and as he did yesterday and will at the G20 summit later this year, preach about favorable rates and a new form of colonialism in the form of exorbitant tariffs, etc., you can't do that when you wasted the money you borrowed or when you stole the money you borrowed.
Exactly.
So essentially, you have to get off the high horse.
There we go.
Yep.
Thank you. Kudita, thank you very much indeed. Lulu, thank you. Busi, thank you. And thank you to Kyle as well. And thank you for coming, everybody. Thank you, everybody. That's the best non-budget breakfast we've ever had. Thanks, everybody, from particularly the Eastern Cape. Thank you very much indeed. Cheers. Well done, guys.